to be very careful what I wish for if you all come at me at once. Today I want to take the opportunity to talk about where the New Zealand economy is at as we put Budget 2022 together and highlight the course that we are charting through our economic plan to take it forward. Budget 2022 is being delivered in uncertain and volatile times, and it does seem, yes, like I've said that every year that I have been standing here as Minister of Finance. I promise you it's not me. But this is a budget being delivered still in the shadow of COVID-19, and if that were not enough, we now have highly elevated global inflation, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, which is driving significant cost of living pressures for businesses and households alike. It's tough going for many people, and after 2 years of COVID, that's even more keenly felt. And despite my fervent hope that the word COVID would not feature so much in my vocabulary this year, the pandemic remains ever present. We've managed to protect New Zealand from the impacts of the deadly earlier variants, and through vaccination, testing and continuing public health measures, we are in a better position than most countries to deal with an Omicron outbreak. But it's still not easy, and like you, I'm well and truly over it. However, as we navigate this challenging time, I do think it's important not to lose sight of what we've achieved together in the face of this extraordinary shock. Our health and economic response is among the best in the world, and this is recognised as such by the major credit rating agencies, by the IMF and the OECD, to name just a few. Through COVID, the New Zealand economy suffered the single biggest hit to GDP on record, but it's now 3.5% above its pre-crisis level. At the time I was presenting the budget in 2020, Treasury forecasted that unemployment would get close to 10% within a short period of time. As we know, unemployment peaked at just on 5.3%. New Zealand took a total of 6 quarters to return to its pre-crisis level of employment, a year and a half. By way of comparison, following the GFC, unemployment in New Zealand remained elevated across a decade. Now, our response didn't happen by accident. It happened because we put in place policies like the wage subsidy that kept Kiwis in work, and because businesses and workers stepped up and battled through. In the last 2 quarters, unemployment has been at 3.2%, the equal lowest rate on record. The Māori unemployment rate has declined from a peak of 9.1% to its current level of 6.3%. Pacific unemployment peaked at 10.4% and now sits at 6.7%. Now actually these rates are still too high, and there remains much more to be done to give all New Zealanders the opportunity and dignity that comes with work. But the strength of our economic recovery has meant that sections of our population are seeing opportunities in the labour market in a way that they haven't done for decades. Other economic indicators show that we're in a strong position. Our GDP is up 5.6% from the same time last year. We have used our balance sheet to support the economy through the pandemic. However, our Obergale deficit for the 9 months to the end of March was $8.1 billion, $4.1 billion lower than what was forecast at the half-year economic and fiscal update in December 2021. And we are now forecast to reach a surplus in 2024-25. This will be 5 years after COVID began, compared with the 6 years it took to get there after the GFC. Our debt is set to peak at about half of Australia's, around a third of that in the UK, and around a fifth of the United States, based on comparable measures. So as a result of New Zealanders' hard work and our health-led response, we are now in a strong position to face our latest set of hurdles, but also importantly deal with the long-term challenges and opportunities that New Zealand has put in the too hard basket for too long. The short-term challenge of inflation is significant. Global supply chains have struggled to deal with the volume of goods that have hit international ports and shipping networks as demand has strongly rebounded. Ongoing policy localised lockdowns in China have caused further disruptions at ports. And of course, the recent illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia has caused volatility in global energy and food markets and pushed inflation rates to even higher levels. I've heard a great deal recently about the impact of government spending on inflation. We do need to be careful with what we spend, make sure that it's value for money and targeted to where it can make a difference. We did this through COVID with our health and economic response, and we continue to do it today. There were and are no costless decisions. Doing less would have seen unemployment grow or put people's health at risk. It's a balance, and it's one that I think we got about right. We cannot control the global drivers of inflation, but we can control how we respond to it. The actions we've taken to date have been targeted towards those most affected by the types of inflation we've been seeing. Low and middle income households have been supported by a range of income support measures that came into effect on the 1st of April this year. We've also taken action to alleviate the broader impacts of higher fuel prices by cutting fuel excise duty and halving the price of public transport to make that option more attractive for New Zealanders. Looking forward, we need to be conscious of the fact that the economy is experiencing capacity constraints. Skilled labour is scarce in a range of areas, and many businesses who a short time ago were wondering if they would survive are now wondering where they'll find the workers to meet their current demand. Fiscal policy needs to be set with these conditions in mind, and it will be. The spending that we provided to support the economy through COVID-19 was time limited. Government spending as a percentage of GDP is actually about the same as it was after the GFC, and it's actually set to reduce over the coming years. But what we must not do while dealing with the pressures of the here and now is put off dealing with long-term challenges. If we decided against reforming our health system, we would not see lower petrol prices. We'd just have high petrol prices and a health system that's not working. Too often the New Zealand economy has been run along these lines. Investment has been turned on and off in response to short-term considerations, resulting in a long series of chain reactions, delaying planning decisions, business case development, workforce recruitment, and investment in sector capacity. I don't believe that that approach has served our current needs, and I certainly don't think it's adequate for our future needs. Whether it's addressing our long-standing productivity gap with other advanced countries, addressing the housing crisis, or fixing our planning or three waters systems, a short-term, hands-off approach isn't going to cut it. Budget 2022 does mark a move past the crisis budgets of COVID to a new normal. We will bring the stability and certainty of fiscal rules, but also take the lessons of COVID to take on the big challenges and opportunities and address the shortcomings and the inequities of the old normal. My vision for our economic future can be summed up in one sentence. I want a high-wage, low-emissions economy that gives economic security in good times and bad. The building blocks to reach that goal are being put in place. Last week, I announced the new fiscal rules that will guide us over the future budgets. This is the really exciting bit in the speech. The first is that we will, on average, run an Obergell surplus of between 0 and 2% of GDP. Alongside that, we have set a net debt ceiling of 30% of GDP using a more comparable and accurate measure of our debt. The underlying idea behind these changes is actually quite simple. We will continue to pay for our current spending through current revenue, but we'll use the debt ceiling to buffer us against economic shocks, and it will give us more room to make infrastructure investments that will enhance our productivity, help us meet the challenge of climate change, and are of high quality. It also makes sense for us to spread the cost of these investments over time. And there is no shortage of things to do when it comes to infrastructure. Last week, the Infrastructure Commission released Rautaki Hananana o Aotearoa, the 30-year New Zealand infrastructure strategy. The report not only highlighted the infrastructure deficit, which has been building up over previous decades, but also set out the need to comprehensively change the way in which we plan, deliver, and maintain our infrastructure. We all know the real-life impact of failing to invest enough in an efficient way. It's the congestion on our roads, it's the broken pipes, Andy, it's the poor quality of our hospitals and schools. We now have the strategy, the pipeline of work and the funding to start to address that deficit. In last year's budget, we outlined $57 billion worth of capital spending over the next 5 years to take this on, and in this budget, we will make use of the multi-year capital allowance to add to that. Dealing with our infrastructure deficit is only part of addressing our decades-long productivity challenge and getting to a higher wage economy. The government is focused on lifting our research, development and innovation performance, and on diversifying who we trade with and what we're able to offer them. We want to support businesses to access new markets, to raise the capital they need, and to help provide the skilled workforce that will move them forward. This includes the work we've been doing on industry transformation plans, the Regional Strategic Partnership Fund, and the work we've been doing to lift productivity through the Digital Boost program. I'm immensely proud of the work we've done to lift skills and provide training opportunities. More than 190,000 people have benefited from our free apprenticeships, targeted trade training and employment programs. And just this week, we announced the extension of the Apprenticeship Boost program through to the end of 2022 to enable a further 38,000 apprentices to finish their on-the-job training. We need to do more to draw upon global sources of knowledge and to attract skills and investment to New Zealand in a way that benefits everyone involved. We have been through an extraordinary period in which inward migration has been heavily constrained due to public health requirements. As the Prime Minister announced yesterday, our immigration rebalance will reopen our borders to inward migration, but in a way that embodies the objectives of our government. A green list will provide a streamlined pathway for residency for workers with skills that are in high demand. This approach will enable us to support the development of high-value industries and to alleviate some of the supply constraints that are present in areas such as construction. At the same time, we'll be working with some industries via sector agreements to help them transition away from a reliance on low-wage international workers. This approach recognises that industries will not be able to transform overnight and that some sectors are still feeling the effects of COVID-19. But the direction that we're setting out is clear. Where a shortage of skilled labour is a barrier to economic development, then there is a place for immigration to lift our economic performance. But we do not intend to return to the level of immigration that we saw throughout the previous decade or to the level of dependence on temporary migration that we saw in some sectors. We have good examples where a partnership approach with business can help to make sure that everyone is pushing in the same direction, and Budget 2022 will very much build on this approach. On Monday, we will release our emissions reduction plan and the funding to back that up through the first allocations from our Climate Emergency Response Fund. That fund has been created by recycling all of the revenue from the emissions trading scheme directly to emissions reductions initiatives. Dealing with climate change is something that we need to get right and get right now. We all know the environmental imperative that we're facing, but there is also a real risk that if we drag our feet on emissions reductions, we face the possibility of the world moving on from the sorts of things that New Zealand is currently a world leader in producing. Every country in the world will have to change the way in which it meets the needs of its people in the face of climate change. This is a challenge, but it is also an extraordinary opportunity for New Zealand. There are areas such as hydrogen, renewable energy, wood processing, agri-tech, where we can and do lead the world, and we will create the high jobs that we need. We will partner with businesses to support them in making the transition toward low emissions technologies and work with sectors with more hard to abate emissions to develop more sustainable ways of operating. We will also provide support to lower emissions alternatives to make them accessible to a greater number of households. We can no longer put off meaningful action on climate change. The emissions reductions plans that we have created are ambitious, but they're also achievable, and we will meet the tasks set for us in our emissions budgets. Taking action on climate change is also a matter of economic security. Our economy is less reliant on fossil fuels than it once was, and the areas where the Ukraine crisis is hurting us are the areas where we've made less progress in decarbonisation, such as our private transport fleet. Increasing the uptake of low emissions vehicles will help us meet our emissions budget, but it also softens the blow on households the next time we see a global energy crisis. Economic security also comes from having strong public services. As I've signalled previously, a key focus of Budget 2022 will be on our health system. The health of our people is central to our wellbeing approach. When people don't get the care that they need, it affects all aspects of their life. And for many years now, New Zealanders have not received the outcomes that they deserve from their health system. The quality of healthcare and the availability of specialists differs from region to region. The system is fragmented and inefficient, with management structures too often getting in the way of the best approach to care. Prioritising issues at a national level, which we had to do with COVID, is extremely difficult working across 20 DHBs. Long-term planning in our system is inadequate, and we continue to see large inequities in health outcomes for Māori and Pacific peoples. New Zealand has also underinvested in its healthcare system with predictable outcomes. Part of this is actually due to the lack of financial control and mixed levels of financial capability that are characteristic of the DHB system. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that the culture of DHB deficits is a direct result of the chronic underfunding of the health budget. Budget 2022 will be about health. It will be about setting up a national health system that can meet the needs of our nation. It will be about setting up the infrastructure that will direct the attention of our health workforce to where the need for care is greatest, not to the vagaries our current structures direct them to. To get this right, we also need the workers that our system needs. In addition to training those we have here, the Green List process will prioritise and provide a residency pathway for a range of occupations that are in critical need: nurses, clinical psychologists, medical technicians, and a range of specialist occupation. Getting the foundation of our health system right will require sustained investment. Budget 2022 will lay the groundwork for that change. Health will move to a multi-year funding track, initially through a 2-year transitional investment, before moving to 3-year budgets from 2024-25. This reform will provide the certainty as needed for the system to plan for our long-term health priorities. To conclude, these have been an extraordinary past couple of years for everyone. As a country, we should be proud of how we have responded. But now we need to take that pride and the lessons that we have learned and put them to work on shaping our new normal. Uncertainty and volatility are part of the new normal, but so is a New Zealand economy that is the envy of many in the world. We are in a strong position to weather the storm of global inflation and build that high-wage, low-emissions economy that provides security for all New Zealanders in good and tough times. At every budget, there's a balance to strike. Get the basics right, do what's right for current and future generations, and secure a better tomorrow. It's a balance that we've struck before, and it's one that I believe we'll do again in this budget. Thank you for listening today, and I look forward to your questions. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.